And blessed to be with you, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Joining us now from the National Review and author of the new book, The Smallest Minority, Kevin Williamson. Mr. Williamson, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Not bad here in Idaho. How is it in Texas?
Oh, good. I love Idaho. It's one of my favorite places in the country. It's Idaho and Utah. If we weren't in Texas, we might be there.
I tell you, you take a look at the Idaho way, the Utah way, and even the Texas way to some degree, with all these folks moving in from California, worried about conservatism in these states losing its identity and becoming more progressive.
Yeah, you folks need to build a wall on your border there, I think.
How's that working out for you guys?
Yeah, we're going to build one along the northern border of the Red River here in Texas.
Mr. Williamson, first and foremost, the state of the Republic today, obviously you write about this in The Smallest Minority Against Mob Rule that continues to percolate on social media. How are we doing overall, sir?
Well, I think we're in a bad place because the team sports aspect of politics, which is a normal part of politics, that kind of tribalism is not always unhealthy, but at our particular moment, it has really grown to the point where it has excluded every other aspect of politics. So people aren't really having conversations, I think, about the national interest, about real substantive policy issues. It's, finger pointing, look at you idiots on Team Red, look at you evil coastal elites on Team Blue, and this conversation where we can't deal with one another as individuals and citizens, but only as representatives and mascots of warring tribes.
Would that be with what's going on between the president and the four congresswomen?
Well, the president's kind of a one of a kind. He's an unusual figure for politics, and certainly an unusual figure for American politics. He seems to enjoy this sort of thing, but he enjoyed it before he was president too. He's got a long career of being kind of a professional public controversialist. I wish he would spend a little more time being president and a little less time on Twitter. But again, the sort of place we are is that he gets a lot of positive feedback for that. His people, his most enthusiastic supporters want him on Twitter having these social media fights rather than in the Oval Office doing what presidents typically do.
When we take a look at your books, The Smallest Minority, you take on mob politics, mob rule. Hamilton feared that the most concerning the future of the Republic. Your thoughts on the mob rule that is here today?
Yeah, there's sort of two parts to our system of government. We call it liberal democracy, and the democracy is the less important part in some ways, and the liberalism in the old-fashioned sense of that word, meaning the Constitution, rule of law, Bill of Rights, protection of minority interests, property rights, freedom of speech. That's the important part. The democracy is the procedural business by which you secure those rights and interests and the rule of law. And what we're doing is elevating this idea that if 50% of the population plus one want something, then democracy means that they must have it. And so we really are at a place, I think, where we're in danger of enacting, say, European-style limitations on free speech and political criticism and other things like that. So even though at the Supreme Court level and the legal level, we've got really good First Amendment jurisprudence going on right now, thanks to a lot of good judges who have been appointed over the years, including some by President Trump. Give him credit for that. We're at a place where in the culture, that idea of free speech and that principle as a bedrock, fundamental, foundational thing of our republic is really eroding very quickly. And so people want to know, well, why shouldn't we go after this guy who's, a programmer at Google who has ideas that we don't like and make sure that he loses his job and can't work and that sort of thing in order to force him to either adopt our political views or keep quiet about his own. And that's a really unhealthy place to be as a culture, I think.
And yet that seems to be the way things are going. If people don't like what you say, dissent seems to be lost and people want to ruin you economically. We see that with media figures as well.
Yeah, although for media figures, I think it's kind of less important. I went through this infamous thing with The Atlantic where they fired me on my third day of work there for some stuff I'd written a long time ago. But for us, that's kind of a professional hazard, right? We're in that business. We're in the controversy business. Sometimes that's going to happen. Where it's a real problem, I think, is for people who are, employees of Silicon Valley tech firms or they're managers of a Starbucks in Philadelphia. And they see these examples being made of people around them and people who are like them. And what they learn from that is to never speak up in the first place. If you've got I got fired by the Atlantic. I wrote a column about it in the Wall Street Journal. Fine, life goes on for someone like me. But if you're an accountant at a bank somewhere and you're thinking about joining, Bankers for Trump group on Facebook, you got to think twice before you hit that join button, because it could have real consequences for you and for your family and for your life in a way that is not normally related to democratic participation in ordinary politics. And that is something that's new and troubling.
And yet that if you sign up for Libs for AOC, there are no economic repercussions.
Well, I suspect that there could be in some places. I think the left, is a lot more aggressive about this right now. But you suspect there are people who want to, punish Nike for its political affiliations because they're offended by the Colin Kaepernick stuff. And rather than have a conversation about it, it's let's have a boycott. And then it becomes a tit for tat thing, right? So conservatives start saying, well, the left does this, so we should do this in response to it. And it ends up being the, Gandhi thing of an eye for an eye, leaving the whole world blind. And at some point, someone's going to have to stand up and say, you know what, I think you're a jackass, and I don't agree with this, but also I don't think that you should be driven out of business or lose your job or be socially sunned because you have political ideas that are different from mine. We can have a conversation about this because we're Americans and we're citizens and we're adults, and that's what we do.
Kevin Williamson, our guest, the smallest minority, independent thinking in the age of mob politics. Kevin Miller here, KIDO Talk Radio. Why write this book?
Well, actually I started writing it in 2015, a couple of years before the Atlantic thing, and nobody wanted it at the time. Nobody wanted it until I got fired. And so it got picked up shortly thereafter. I started writing it because I think that it's important to a self-governing free republic that we be able to have intelligent conversations about this sort of thing, and that we be able to disagree with one another without making it sort of a civil Cold War. If we can't have a real conversation inside of our democratic institutions and between the people, then we can't really bring the intelligence that we need to bring to bear on our actual social problems, because that's how democracies actually deal with things, by having conversations about them. That's how we figure out where to go on things. And if you can't have an honest, open, really robust conversation in which people who really strongly disagree about important things are able to exchange those ideas, then the information gets bottlenecked, and you're unable to really address your problems in an effective way.
Sure, it is a challenge, though, when you have people calling you a right-wing extremist for just expressing your views.
Yeah, and of course I'm a right-wing extremist, so in my case that's fine. But when people, if you disagree with me about taxes, you're a Nazi. If you disagree with me about the environment, you're a Nazi. If you disagree with me about, whether we should suspend the constitutional rules about who can be president and appoint AOC to the job tomorrow, you're a Nazi. And that sort of thing is really deeply unhelpful and worse than unhelpful. It's destructive. It's something that inhibits the effective functioning of our political culture.
Mr. Williamson, how do you see the election playing out? The presidential election.
Some of your listeners will know I was not and am not much of an admirer of President Trump's, and I wrote a book called The Case Against Trump in 2016, which was not effective, apparently. So with that in mind, if I were betting my own money on it right now, I think that I would slightly lean toward Donald Trump being reelected. I think that that's probably the most likely outcome, although I don't think it's an overwhelmingly more likely outcome, but I would say, maybe 52 versus 48% chance that's what happens. The Democrats are going to nominate someone who is crazy and divisive, probably, and because they don't really have a lot of choices of people who aren't. The Democrats could have gone with someone like, Mike Bloomberg or Howard Schultz or someone like that, and probably cleaned up a lot of people who are alienated from the current environment of polarization and extremism might actually settle on one of those characters, as many problems as both of those men have. But I think they're going to end up, going with someone who is both polarizing and a bad campaigner, like Elizabeth Warren. The one I would worry about the most if I were advising Donald Trump would probably be Kamala Harris, who I think is smart and ruthless and a pretty good politician and a natural at it. And I think she would be a formidable opponent, but I don't think she's the one that will end up nominating.
And finally, back to your firing by the Atlantic. I mean, it doesn't get much higher than writing for the Atlantic, writing for National Review. What was that like for you personally? I mean, not everybody can write for the Atlantic. Heck, not everybody can read the Atlantic.
Yeah. Well, it was weird. It was kind of less of a big deal for me than it was for my family. I've been fired from jobs before. I've been fired from jobs I cared more about before, to be honest. Sometimes you get fired in life. My family wasn't used to this kind of weird personal vituperation. So when there are 9 columns written about you in the New York Times, and that's not something that normally happens to a journalist like me. It's not like I'm a very, very famous writer or something, or a very famous media figure. I'm not Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or someone like that who is written about all the time and talked about all the time in the media. So that was a little weird for people around me. I mean, for me, I don't really care very much. There are about 25 people whose opinions about these sort of things really matter to me. And when I hear from one of them, that's a big deal. But when some, anonymous nobody on Twitter is writing that you're an evil Nazi or something like that, or when it's Paul Krugman, who's the laziest journalist in America, to me, it's just noise in the background.
Mr. Williamson, we appreciate you joining us and hope to see you in Idaho soon. And we urge people to check out your book, The Smallest Minority. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Talk to you soon.
All right. There you have it. Kevin Williamson from the National Review. Great job booking that one, Ray Amaya. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Rolling on the right side, K. Millie in the morning. Phone number is 580-5436, 580-KIDO. If you're just waking up, we were getting your reaction to the postcard sent to Idaho legislators that portray the president of Boise State University as a clown, the State Board of Education members as clowns, quoting her salary of over $425,000, quoting the programs at Boise State that conservatives disagree with. Now you have people on the left, in the middle, denouncing it. Poor taste or right up your alley, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. To me, this is not the first shot that you want to fire. Conservatives, Republicans, we have to, unfortunately, go that extra effort and be above reproach. This allows our opponents to marginalize us. This allows our opponents to label us as extremists. Now, you're going to have some liberals saying, well, this shouldn't happen. This is hateful. No, you have to have a sense of humor. And yes, in America, you have the right to be offensive. You have the right to be controversial. You have the right to do those things. There was a big lawsuit. There was a movie about it. Larry Flint, the pornographer, publisher of Hustler magazine, went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, yep, you can make fun of Jerry Falwell, no matter how bad or in poor taste it may be. There is a big issue that is brewing that has been simmering for quite some time on these airwaves, and that involves what is and what isn't acceptable to teach young, impressionable minds at your favorite college. Now, you have to take a look at this. This has been going on for quite some time. The Republicans have had the supermajority in this state. Why in the world have the Republicans allowed this to happen? They have the control over the Board of Education. Now, you couldn't get rid of Dr. Custer because of his accomplishments, and who would want to? Whether you agree with him or not, Dr. Custer did echo in the golden age of Boise State, topped off by Garth Brooks himself, Entertainment Tonight themselves covering the concert. 86,000 people. Woo, good for them. What does it mean for conservatism? What does it mean for us when you have, again, a very powerful university with an agenda where you have separate graduation ceremonies that we've just been finding out about? You have concerned state legislators writing a letter. You have Democratic legislators writing a counter letter. And then you have this postcard. That's one issue. Now, legalizing marijuana. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. If you're just tuning in, getting you updated on what we've been talking about all morning long. You have Senator Kamala Harris, Congressman Jerry Nadler saying they want to legalize marijuana at the federal level. Now, besides making money, what's the reason for that? Besides making money, what's the overall reason? Well, it never should have been illegal to begin with. Well, medical marijuana helps everybody. Does it? Where's the proof there? Where's the medical studies? The pot industry has a ton of money. Why haven't they funded that? In fact, we had somebody approaching not only us from a business perspective, representing, our interests here at the Kevin Miller Show, but other people saying, hey, approaching Mrs. Miller saying, I'm opening up a dispensary in Ontario. If your husband ever wants to have me on, I'd be more than happy to come on it. Look, we would love to liberate Ontario, Oregon. Do you hear me? We would love to liberate Ontario, Oregon, now that they are under siege and taken over by the pro-pot people, right? That is the scary part about this. And yet you have the federal government saying it's illegal and 11 states not enforcing it. And tell me what employer would like their worker to be smoking pot. I don't think you could get an employer to do that. We go to your email. You can always reach me, Kevin, at KIDOTalkRadio.com. Kevin, if the folks think they're losing liberties now, wait till half the population is stoned and see what happens. Thank you for that, Jim. Liberal Steve says, cannabis is the gateway to being a fatty. Terry has nothing to worry about. Wow. 8:25 is our time. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Traffic and weather together.
The USDA says it wants to close a loophole that allows states to make those enrolled in the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families benefits automatically eligible for the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. The proposal would affect about 3 million people and would limit the automatic eligibility to households that are getting substantial state-funded benefits. USDA officials say the move will save billions of dollars. The public will be able to comment on this for 60 days at regulations.gov. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
KIDO Talk Radio, our time 8:27. Coming up, we'll take a look at the president's move to cut about 31 million people from getting the food stamps. Sherlock in Nampa, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio. Hello, Sherlock.
Well, good morning, Kevin.
Hello.
Having attended BJC when it was $35 a semester, the present cartoon is most appropriate. And I should leave it right there. But I will mention that both, like Liberal Steve, he's got a good mind. He does. And he's a true liberal. When I say that, that goes back to like Hubert Humphrey and before, Harry Truman for that matter. But yes, I am older than not the proverbial dirt, but nevertheless is that the constant, one would say a waterfall of, oh, we need more money for this, that, and we need to diversify, we need this and that. The cartoon is most appropriate.
The cartoon that portrays the president of Boise State University as a clown.
Yes.
Do you believe that she's a clown?
Let me rephrase it. Of course not. She's got her Ph.D. She is within the system. As what would be interesting is for somebody to look at how many assistants do they have, and just what do the various professors having tenure, what do they get per year, and to teach what? I know the agenda within the education system presently at the higher levels is critical theory. But nevertheless, it is critical only to their own benefit. Similar to what most I say most, not all, most politicians are interested only in their own bank accounts.
Sure.
I'll leave it there.
Oh, you are.
You have a good day.
Thank you, Sherlock. More of your calls next. And again, President Trump looking to cut the food stamp program. We'll get your reaction next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning, Maggie. Kevin Miller in the morning at KIDO Talk Radio. By the way, getting ready for Robert Mueller's testimony, which will happen tomorrow. We will have complete coverage of that beginning at 6:30 our time. You can tune in all morning long to hear what the former special prosecutor has to say.
The president, people will say, his remarks are racist and will forget the inherent racism that has always been part of him.
there you have it. Representative Omar, her thoughts on the president. Of course, the Omar and the president going back and forth on this. We'll have more on that. Plus, your phone calls at 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Jared Halpern joins us live from Capitol Hill from Fox News Radio on KIDO Talk Radio. Jared, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Well, is a good morning for our debt and the debt limit?
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you think the debt limit should be suspended for 2 years, because that's what this legislation that was introduced will do, in addition to essentially ending what has been known as sequestration, although we should point out that the sequestration, those automatic budget cuts, those automatic spending cuts that were put in place because of the failure of a big debt deal several years ago, had sort of incrementally been allowed to increase. This sort of busts those caps in a much more permanent way. And the result is it will allow spending increases for both the defense side of the ledger and the non-defense side of the ledger. Certainly Republicans, the president, trumpeting a lot of the spending increases that can now happen on the defense side, while Democrats are certainly happy that they were able to secure what they've been looking for, which is parity of spending increases on the non-defense side.
Sure, of course, sooner or later we're going to have to pay for this, and I don't know any of us that could go to our creditors and say, we'd like to get rid of our debt limit.
No. I mean, you also don't have to usually, I don't think. I've never had to pay for like a war or sort of contingencies. But no, you're right. I mean, that's going to be one of the concerns from fiscal conservatives is that we are already running under the Trump administration over $1 trillion a year budget deficits. This will only increase those budget deficits. Now, the debt limit is a little bit different. That's not increasing debt. That is certainly that is allowing the United States government to continue paying off debt. It's a borrowing limit, and the problem with having that is very soon, within a matter of weeks, the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin had warned that without the authority to borrow more money, the United States would default for the first time ever, which would rattle markets. One of the big motivators for this administration to try and push for a debt limit increase is the fear that it would undo a lot of the economic gains, particularly when you look at the stock market. Just the fear of a default has been enough in the past to really rattle the markets and cause a steep decline. That happened once during the Obama administration, if you remember, a few years ago. And so, every administration, Republican or Democrat, wants to raise the debt limit, does not want the question of U.S. U.S. sovereignty to fall in doubt. So that's not surprising. Now, obviously, this is going to be a tough vote for a lot of people to take. The toughest vote, I think, that lawmakers take is one to suspend the debt limit. This would at least suspend it until after the 2020 election, suspending it for 2 years in July of 2021. And with it is this budget deal that would allow additional funding for the military, which is something that at least will be palatable to a large number of Republicans. I think you're going to see some pushback from conservatives. I think you're going to see some pushback from progressives, from some liberals on this as well. This certainly will not be a unanimous vote, but leadership at least remains confident that when this goes for a vote later this week in the House, next week in the Senate, that they'll have the votes. Now, I will always say that this is always the big question mark on Capitol Hill, is will the president go wobbly kneed on this? Yesterday, he was quick to tweet out that this deal was made, trumpeted it, talked about what a good deal it was. We have seen bipartisan agreements in the past that the president seemed to be on board with, only in the final minutes there to start backing away, to show some reluctance, some hesitancy. As conservatives start to balk at this deal, start to talk about debt and deficit, will the president get weak-kneed, back away? That's, I think, the big question mark on Capitol Hill. So you're really seeing, particularly on the Republican side, leadership go all in on this, trying to sell this, trying to point out what was good for the Republican side, trying to point out the realities of divided government, because we have seen in the past these bipartisan agreements sort of fall apart after the president has a change of heart.
You never know how the president's going to roll, do you?
No, I mean, listen, I mean, He has certainly, we've seen deals in the past. I mean, CRs, other spending type issues where the president seemed to be on board. You know, that big spending deal a few months ago, the vice president came and got Republican senators on board with it, only to see the president the next morning send out a tweet that he may veto it. I mean, you know, we'll see. I mean, that's always the big question mark. And I sort of always, you know, wait and see what the reaction is to GOP leadership, because they've been put in that awkward position before where they've sort of gone all in on legislation that they know is not going to be the most popular, with some sort of assurance or some sort of belief that the president's on board with this. You know, part of this deal yesterday was allowing the president to announce it. You saw that the statements from Democratic leaders followed the announcement from President Trump, giving the president some ownership of this. Perhaps that helps, you know, sell this to conservatives, to rank-and-file Republicans in a way that is going to be important to have the president's blessing on this, because it is certainly easier to vote if you're a Republican with something that the president supports than to vote for something that the president says later on he does not support.
Jared Halpern, to be continued. I bet you're going to be busy for the next few days. Well, you're always busy.
Well, we got this hearing tomorrow, maybe you heard about, so that should keep us pretty busy here for at least tomorrow and the day after.
Any predictions on that?
On Mueller?
Yeah.
No, listen, I think it's an important hearing regardless of what Mueller says, because I do think that you're going to see the special counsel stick pretty closely to the text of his report. I don't think you're going to see Robert Mueller veer too much in an open session from that report. At the same time, that is still important if you think about putting voice to a pretty dense piece of writing that an awful lot of people maybe haven't had the opportunity or time or interest to dive deep into, right? Somebody like me reading all of it for my job is different than I think a lot of people who have jobs where they don't have to read the Mueller report, right? So, you know, at least having him explain it verbally in radio, television-friendly sound bites could crystallize it for a lot of people in a way that maybe has been a little harder, a little foggy in the months since it's been released. So even if he sticks close to it, I think it'll be important to sort of get his take on why he wrote things the way that he did, maybe in some of the questions about what was the intent here versus what wasn't the intent. But again, I don't think, just based on what we know about Robert Mueller, the former FBI director, you're going to see much in the way of sort of groundbreaking, I have something I want to tell all of you that I didn't write in this report type of moment.
Jared, we appreciate it. Thank you. I could go on and on, but I know you're busy, so
well,
thank
you. Know,
you,
as they say around here, we'll see.
Thank you, Jared. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Tea Party Bob joins us now on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, sir. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Miller. I hear the circus is in town and we have a new head clown.
Wow.
You know, I only wish there were more clown pictures depicting many of the people in our educational system whom we pay obnoxious amounts of money to for teaching our children to be good liberal Democrats. What Bill said this morning is absolutely correct. We are at war, but the war is not with our public education system. It is with our public education system, not with anything else. What is ironic about this whole thing is that for the past 50 or 60 years, we as taxpayers of this country have been financing a silent revolution to turn our country into a socialized entity using our public education system. It started in the more liberal states with tenure, where you couldn't fire teachers for not doing a good job or even doing a bad job. Then you had the teachers' unions that would strike to keep their jobs and get higher salaries. As they grew stronger, the parent teachers associations became less and less important, along with the parents' involvement in the school system and their boards of education. Eventually, the liberal Democrats and the bureaucrats had the jobs necessary within the system to make sure the educational material they were buying and using to teach in our schools was more liberal in their content, along with changing many of the historical values by simply changing history in the content of the educational history book. Keep in mind that all the time these changes were taking place, they were doing it with taxpayer money, to the point where public education has become the second and third highest budget item in almost all the states. Our colleges have been in transition for much of the last century. using the same propaganda and slowly changing our college students to be more agreeable to the liberal left through a process that not only offering but pushing certain requirements that are liberally attuned courses that must be taken by students if they want to graduate. The liberals have fully infiltrated our state educational systems, stacking the boards by getting more liberal leftists appointed to these omnipotent positions.
Right, but you win a war by winning hearts and minds. When all of a sudden somebody's been in the state a couple months and you make a balloon about, not a balloon, a postcard that she's a clown. That's not hearts and minds. And then people can label people extremists and hateful and everything else. Now, do people have a right to do it? Yes. Is it the right move?
I'm not so sure whether it's the right move or not, but I'll tell you, when he says you're at war, you are at war. If you don't want to see this whole thing go down the tubes, you need to start saying things like this. That's what they do all the time. We're the only ones who are supposed to be contrite when we say something they don't like. You know, they do all this liberal hiring of left-leaning professors who set the educational programs and courses required for degrees. It's important. This is a very important position she's in. All of this takes place without the
she was hired. But she was hired by the Board of Education. That was appointed by, you don't blame her. She got the job.
Yeah. No, you have to blame the people who are at the top, who have basically been in the bureaucratic positions to do this. You know, ultimately, we're the ones footing the bill for all of this. Don't we have the right to find out more about this person, to have a say in who we're going to hire? You know, the federal government loans financed by the taxpayer pay for all of it, along with the money we give to state boards to give to our colleges every year. So in the end, the liberal left have a win-win situation. They get the taxpayers not only to fund the colleges that they're charging obscene tuition to our students, but they give them the power to change the curriculum to meet their agenda. We get to pay for higher tuition. They get what they want. Is that right? Is that fair?
I think you've dodged the point about the postcard. Personally,
I don't think the postcard has anything to do with the underlying problem. I think the postcard.
Well, then where has been the oversight on the State Board of Education for the last 10 years as universities, as people have said, have gone lefty loony? Where were people putting pressure on the state boards about raising tuition and yet not offering anything except more liberal indoctrination, according to people?
Who's been paying for it?
Well,
nobody has been watching it.
Right. Well, you have people watching it. They send a letter. It's responded to. Then you have the students responding, and then you have this postcard.
I believe it or not, I don't see anything wrong with the postcard. That's why we have the First Amendment. You want to put a postcard out like that?
I don't have a problem with people expressing their First Amendment. I just don't know if this was the best case to be made.
Well, we're going to find out over the next couple of years where this lady goes to.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, it's easy to go after her, but it's the state board, it's everyone else. And, where is the oversight in the legislature when you have a royal decree that there will be no repeal of the grocery tax during a contentious election where they all promised they would?
Sure, and here we are giving more money to the DACA kids. For what?
Well, at the expense that's what's paying the 6% increase in tuition. Tea Party Bob, thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
580-5436, 580-KIDO. Your thoughts on the postcard and just how safe are the streets for motorists and motorcycles, walkers, pedestrians, and bicyclists. We'll talk about it next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.
A 7-year-old life cut short after being hit by a car while riding his bike on West Amity Road. The latest in a series of bicycle versus car accidents around the Treasure Valley. When it comes to road safety, bike and pedestrian advocates say there are several recurring dangers they see.
Red lights, running them, that's prolific right now. And I'm seeing that on both sides, whether it be a person in a car or on a bicycle.
According to advocates, impatience and frustration from drivers is also far too common. And when it comes to kids,
What I know from my experience in riding with young people is that they do not understand how an automobile works.
so drivers need extra patience and understanding that kids don't always know every single rule of the road. And another problem,
having safe places for people to walk and ride their bikes is very important. And there's a lot of gaps in our infrastructure right now that need to be improved.
ACHD recently released its proposed 5-year budget through 2024, and the agency is having to cut between $16 and $18 million of funding. But it says that doesn't mean community projects like bikeways and pedestrian.
Now, why would ACHD need to cut funding, considering the enormous amount of traffic, the enormous amount of people, the enormous amount of motorists and cars and vehicles and bicyclists that are coming into the Treasure Valley? Why are they cutting anything? And by the way, when we talk about road safety, it is crazy. It is crazy for cars. It is crazy for trucks. If you're riding your bike, just like you're driving your car, you truly are taking your life into your own hands. This young man saying we need more roads and bridges and walkways for bicyclists. Sure, we need more roads, bridges, and highways for cars. So where do you put your money, your resources? Now, you take a look at downtown Boise, bike lanes everywhere. To me, scary stuff. To me, when you're at a four-way stop and it's a red light, people run through the red lights all the time. Crazy. And then you have the issue with bicyclists that if the light's red and no one's coming, they can keep going. Told you the other morning I was driving in. There was a bicyclist, went across the street. No reflective clothing, nothing on. Scared the bejesus out of me. I thought I would hit him. Now, there is a lot to talk about the blame game. Look, we all have to act responsibly. The police can only do so much. Is it time to start raising money for more roads? Didn't we do that when we upped the gas tax the last time a couple of years ago?
Crossings are going away.
We're now looking at ways in which we can incorporate those projects that traditionally have been in community programs, like bikeways, like pedestrian enhancements. We're looking at incorporating them into projects that are moving forward in accordance with our Complete Streets policy.
Meaning every time ACHD looks at improving or building a road, it will also look at how to incorporate bike and pedestrian safety at the same time. ACHD is also working to add more sidewalks where needed and...
Didn't they just say that ACHD was out of money? That ACHD was going to cut $15 to $18 million? And then they're looking at enhancing, the bike lanes and everything else? Maybe there should just be bike roads. I don't know how you do that. Maybe get rid of some of these railroad tracks that the trains don't use. Look, we've talked about this for many, many years, and we will continue to do so. It's scary on the roads. You have people that don't use the turn signals, that tailgate, that drive at excessive speeds, and then all of a sudden they're supposed to behave when you drive 35 miles an hour or 25 when the speed limit is. I love it when you go into a community and the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, and then you have tailgating Timmy or tailgating Tommy or tailgating Teresa on your bumper. Whether it's bikes, whether it's motorists, common sense needs to prevail.
To continue building bikeways.
We are working, and we have just recently completed our first Leadville Bikeway. We've adopted our concept studies for Shoshone as well as Kaja Bikeway. I'm currently working on the 11th Street Bikeway, and we've got programmed projects into the future for bikeway and pedestrian enhancements.
But what it all comes down to...
Patience is the name of the game. We all have a place out there. A road is built for mobility, and mobility is not defined by how many wheels you have.
And there we have it from our friends at Channel 7. More on that in a minute. Kevin Miller in the morning, traffic and weather together, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Dave. If we can impart one lesson to you today, it's to be careful on the roads, and especially if you're biking. There are so many people that are addicted to biking. They're on State Street at 2, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Some people are smart and they have the reflective gear on. They have the flashing lights. They're being as safe as possible. But that's not going to keep you from people that are acting irresponsibly. And that's where we all come in. We have to take accountability for one another and ourselves. Ray Amaya, great job as always. Glenn Beck is next, everyone. Don't go anywhere. Really appreciate listening. God bless and keep the faith.